I always say that the best thing about consulting are the people that you work with. You're always working with the best, pushing each other to learn more, do more, be more, and go even further. Which is why I'm very excited to be able to go through these conversations with some of our alumni who've gone on to even greater success beyond their consulting career, and learn from them about the high points, the low points, the achievements, the wins, and the lessons that we can all take and apply in our future journeys. Christos Mastoras, founder and managing partner of Iliad Partners. Welcome to Unscripted.
Thank you so much. Good morning. It's great to be here.
These conversations are always enlightening for me. There's a different angle for each person that we talk to. Our alums have gone through, they come from different places and they go to different places, and their journeys are also varied. The first thing that struck me about you is you're not maybe an Englishman in New York, but you're a Greek man in Dubai, and you've been here for almost 17 years, I think. So how did that happen? How did that come about?
I know it's a question I get asked a lot, and sometimes I wonder myself. So how it all started is, first of all, I've always been fascinated by other parts of the world and other cultures, and I was finishing my MBA. I was doing my MBA in Boston at MIT Sloan, and myself and a few other friends, we did a trip out to the Middle East. We visited Dubai, Amman, and a few other places, and it was a very influential trip because I immediately saw a few things which really resonated with me. First of all, the obvious was, as someone who is Greek and from the Eastern Mediterranean, the Arabic culture really resonated with me a lot. I felt very much at home here. I felt something which I call cultural affinity, and it's not something that was foreign to me because growing up in Greece, we're sort of between East and West, and even in my high school. I had a lot of friends who were, Lebanese and Palestinian. So I had this sort of fascination with the Arab world, but this cultural affinity, really was something that made me feel very sort of at home here. That's the first thing. The second thing is, especially when I visited Dubai and we spoke with a lot of interesting stakeholders. Immediately, I kind of sensed that this is a place, and the entire region had so much potential, and had this potential to really develop and expand and grow. I'm not going to pretend or say that I predicted what happened, but I did have this instinct that this region is really going to take off, and it was a very exciting feeling that I would love to be part of this.
Which year was this?
It was 2006.
Yeah.
So it was 2006, and then I moved here in 2007. So it was not something that was planned, right? So actually I think, after my MBA, I was thinking of maybe moving to the West Coast of the US. And of course, in this whole equation, booze at the time actually had a very instrumental role, because during this trip, we attended a few sessions by the booze team at the time, including, Karim Sabah and his team. And I personally was fascinated by the work that was being done here, the impact that was being achieved, and where the region was at a crossroads, and potentially being part of that. So long story short, I interviewed and got accepted to do an internship in the summer of 2006. I spent that summer between Cairo, Riyadh, Dubai, Beirut, and it was meant to be a summer adventure, which ended up being, in the end, a full-time endeavor after I got the full-time offer. So it's very much serendipitous, not something that was necessarily planned, but I'm very sort of grateful that I ended up here. And I would add sort of a third thing, which I think also is important to me, is especially in Dubai, but in the broader region, you saw an optimism that you normally don't necessarily see in other parts of the world. So I grew up in Greece, and then I spent a lot of time in the US and the East Coast, like DC, New York, Boston, etc. And the optimism and the profile of people that you see in this part of the world, especially Dubai, is people who are here to achieve things, to build things, this entrepreneurial spirit. And I found that very optimistic and, sort of attractive, coupled with, continuous days of sunlight combined. I thought was very appealing. So yeah, I moved here in 2007. I joined Booz, or Strategian as it's called today, and that was my initial sort of entry into the region. And here we are, 17 years later.
That resonates a lot. I think it will resonate with a lot of people who just come here to the region and they say 1 year or 2 years, and then they find themselves having a whole lifetime of being here. And the other thing that also resonates is when we talk sort of our colleagues in other parts of the world, even today, the kinds of questions that we're working with clients on here are much bigger and much more ambitious, let's say, than the other ones. So absolutely. You and I have to make sure that since I also had Greek friends when I was in university, we don't stray into the world of the Greek, Arabic terms that might not be appropriate for podcasts. So let's make sure we keep that
100%. No, I'm very conscious of this. We'll do this offline. It's only for the premium version.
Yes. Christos, another thing that's very interesting about your career journey is, people when they're from outside industry or from outside entrepreneurship, they sort of look at careers and they think of them in very uniform ways. They think, it's a very linear thing. You study something, then you work in it, and then you just go from one job to the other. You are the epitome of the reality, which is the opposite of that, because you've had a very, very diverse journey. I think you started your first company while you were still studying, then went to Accenture, then went into 3 startups, then went and did an MBA, then came into consulting, then went to Yahoo, then went into another startup, and now you're a founder of an investment fund. So in and out of entrepreneurship all the time. I want you to think back across this journey and answer a couple of things for me. One, where does this entrepreneurship DNA come from? Because clearly that was something that you kept going back to. And the other thing is, are there pivotal moments where you took conscious decisions to change your path, or something coincidental happened and changed your path, looking back?
I think all of us maybe have the instinct to try to assign reason and rationality and uniformity in our decisions in our journey. And I think that in most cases that's really not possible, because we always have a plan and then the plan changes. I'm not even sure I remember exactly what my plan was, initially. But I think what happens is life happens, right? And life is not orderly, it's actually messy. And you kind of adapt to your environment and to the opportunities around you. So, if you had told me, 20, 25 years ago that I would be in venture capital based in the Middle East, I'd probably be like, you're crazy, there's no way. But the path, when I actually talk about my career path, I try to assign uniformity actually, right? So I say, I started my career in consulting. So I, bunch up the Accenture and the Booz & Company together, which actually was separate. Then I was in tech corporate, Yahoo. Then I did 4 startups, but actually it was not like that, right? As you very correctly said. But there's always guiding principles. So there is actually order to the chaos, and I think this is maybe sometimes more pronounced in later years, and maybe more subconscious and instinct in the early years. But I personally, I've been driven by a few things like, first of all, I've always been attracted by learning about new cultures, right? So I know who I am, I know my identity. My identity is very important, but at the same time, I feel I'm extremely curious to meet other people from other parts of the world, and that's something that's very important to me. That links back to my love of history. So that also links to a business, let's say, realm in the sense of I've always been attracted not only to different cultures and different parts of the world, but also emerging markets. Because that's where things are built, this is where change happens, and you can be a part of that. So I think this love of other cultures and emerging markets is part of that in my evolution eastward, right? I think that's one. The second thing is entrepreneurship, right? I've always loved to build things. As you mentioned, my first company actually was with my Turkish roommate in undergrad at Georgetown University, so very early on. I don't know where I got the entrepreneurial bug, but I've definitely had it from very early on. Maybe it's cultural in the sense that as Greek people we've always been outward looking, seafaring and all about trade and traveling and learning about the world and being entrepreneurial, or it's just something that I've sort of had in me. But entrepreneurship has been something that I've always been curious about, building new things, fascinated by later on by innovation and technology. That also drove my decision to do my MBA, not anywhere, but at MIT, because I was sort of fascinated by, by that world. So, yeah, I don't.
It's not something that comes from the home environment or what your parents did.
No, I mean, no, I think the enabling factor there was like, they were like, do whatever you would like to do, right? And they gave me the tools, the education to pursue whatever I like. But my father, for example, was in shipping, great space. I was never curious to go into it. Now, actually, full circle, we're looking to invest into logistics companies, including maritime tech. But, fast forward.
Come back to your origins.
Correct. But it was not that, this mindset was dictated by my parents, but they enabled it by giving the tools and the freedom to choose where and how, and, I did all these things.
So yet, when you first left university, you started with a big corporate. Was that the safety of having that first job? Was it the lack of startup ideas at the time? Why didn't you go from my first company while I'm studying to a startup?
Yeah, I don't know if this was the reason I did it at the time, but the rationale I assign to it now is that straight out of undergraduate, it's hard to be an entrepreneur, right? I mean, what I tell founders now when I try to mentor them and hopefully add some value to their journey is that before you become a founder, be an employee of a startup. Before you become an employee of a startup, try out corporate, try out things to learn, right? So I think it's very important to first learn things before we try to build things, because we need that experience and we need that knowledge to do it. But to answer your question, like out of undergrad under Georgetown, I went into Accenture in New York. So there it was about wanting to enter the business world and wanting to have a broad experience in consulting, and I felt that was a good foundation for later. Even though very quickly, 3 years later, I got swooped into the world of startups during the boom and bust of 2000. But that was the thinking.
I find also one of the things that consulting does is create bonds with people or friendships that last way beyond the job. It's certainly been the case with me and with you as well, because Glambox, one of the startups that you did after your consulting career, was actually with 2 other colleagues from consulting. So
3.
3? Okay. Did that happen while you were in consulting, or did the friendship happen in consulting and then the ideas came later? Is it something special about? Because I've heard other people say, we do many jobs, but the friendships don't necessarily last beyond the time in the company. Whereas in consulting, it seems to be a bit different. Where do you think that comes from?
100%. But I would take it a step further. It's not just consulting. It's what we call as alums, the Booz family, right? So I remember when I first moved to the Middle East, I moved over with another 3 of my best friends from MIT Sloan, and one of them was a colleague immediately day one at Booz, so from day one, the firm and the people were our family, right? Because it was our home away from home, right? I think the most memorable thing that we still keep with us after we moved on from the firm is those relationships, extremely strong bonds, the memories, and even to this day, the relationships that we maintain with all these people, right? And thankfully, most of them are still in the region, and we keep in touch, and always attending the alumni parties is like a highlight. But I guess to bring more color to that specifically, Glambox was actually, I think, born in like a boardroom or like a meeting room while we were still with the firm. Right? So it was myself, Shantok Nayan, Faraz Hakad, and Marc Gabriel. And over this time we grew very close as friends, and we were brainstorming on what kind of startup we could launch. So yeah, it was very much born, I think, during the days of Booz, and then launched afterwards. But I would absolutely agree with you. The relationships that are created during and after, and I wouldn't say generically consulting. It's yes, consulting, but specifically Booz was, very memorable and very unique.
It was interesting while we were touring the Experience Center that when we were talking to sort of the younger tech crowd in the room, their idea of the future was a future where there are no people. It's AI agents and doing all the work, and we're just managing them. It's something that, to me, sounds very naive. Maybe it sounds more tech optimist to somebody who's younger.
But also maybe a bit scary.
Also a bit dystopian. I worry about where are the sort of the older experienced people going to come from if there are no younger people who are building up their knowledge. And so maybe this is a perspective that comes with time. And in terms of that, you've been around to see 3 boom and bust cycles globally and in the region. And now you run a fund that's investing in younger people who have a different outlook on where the world is going. How has this, seeing all these boom and bust, how has this shaped your perception or your investment philosophy or your decision making?
I've been fortunate or unfortunate to live through at least 3 booms and busts. So the internet boom and bust of 2000 in the US, the boom and bust of Dubai in 2008, where I distinctly remember, the city emptying out after the crash. And then I guess more recently, between COVID and the VC sort of downturn later on of 2002, 2003, 2023, 22, 23. I think, these crises make you think and understand that, prosperity and growth is not it can be temporary. It's not always sustainable. So it makes you think, how can one be disciplined? How can you sort of cut through the hype, right? Because, when there's a constant growth, there's always hype, there's always sort of like entrepreneurship and technology seeming, very, very attractive, very sexy, but there's a lot of, things behind it, and you have to, it could be short-lived. So I think it's done many things to my thinking, but I think one thing as an investor, especially, it has taught me to, and even though I am, unhindered optimist, is to be disciplined, to be conservative, and to always think of like, what can go wrong, and build that into your investment philosophy, right? But at the same time, I think you have to maintain this optimism and maintain this positive energy because, my job, for example, day to day is really to interact with founders, right? So you don't want to dampen their enthusiasm. You want to encourage them. And, for me, I think the most rewarding part of my job is really interacting with these founders, teaching them things that I've learned from my own experience, which maybe I did not have access to the advice that I wanted when I was a founder. And in the meantime, try to guide them in a way that can be, productive. Now, that all said, I think we're now clearly entering a new phase of, say, technology, of venture capital, of industry, of humanity, where AI is something not only we cannot ignore, but it's becoming a dominant factor in what we do and how things will happen. And I think, I would be lying if I didn't say it's also scary, right? What happens to human relationships? What happens to the human factor, right? And there's a lot of questions flying around in my head. Does the machine serve the human or does the human serve the machine? Ideally, it just simply enhances what we're doing as human beings, whether you're a tech founder or otherwise, and we don't sort of dehumanize everything. And I think as much tech, and I am someone who's in technology, right? I was a tech founder and then now a tech investor. Despite this, I think there is no substitute to human relationships. It's very important to always have that as a dominant characteristic and overlay to whatever we do. AI and any technology is there to help, but not to take over. So without wanting to sound too philosophical, it is a question. I think we're going to struggle with these things, and I think other generations younger than us, they maybe see things differently, and it will be very interesting to see how they tackle it. And if we, are preparing these founders or our children or whoever for this new world, it'll be very interesting to see how things evolve.
on LinkedIn, it seems like every 2 or 3 days, there's some viral post about how it's the end of a particular industry. And the two that I see a lot of, it's consultants are all going to become software, and venture capitalists are all going to become software as well. So you're a venture capitalist. Do you think you're going to become software and you're going to be replaced by software and have that one person just click a button and do all the work that you do today?
Absolutely not. I mean, good luck if for those who believe that. No, I think, again, I think technology will be there to help, right? But you cannot remove the human factor. It cannot automate everything. I mean, just to add some color to that, like in my day-to-day job, part of it is evaluating companies and founders. Probably the most important thing is understanding if a founder has what it takes to succeed. I don't think there's any machine, I humbly say, that can do that necessarily. Like there's a lot of, art to that. There's a lot of, instinct, understanding people through their experiences, how they behave. And, part of the way we do things at Iliad Partners is, we like to interact with founders for a long time before we invest, right? So, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years. And the idea there is you observe behaviors over time, you offer help, you offer feedback, you see how people accept or don't accept or how they internalize that. And you offer them also practical help. You introduce them to clients and it becomes like all these great feedback loops, right? So I hope I don't get proven wrong, but I don't believe you can eliminate the human factor from these things. And having been an ex-consultant, I believe I can safely say that, again, you cannot eliminate the human factor because it's so important, the emotional intelligence that goes into these things. And at the end of the day, a big part of what happens and how things are done and how things succeed or not, especially in this part of the world, is relationships, right? So how do you recreate or evaluate those without, the human component? But let's see how things pan out.
And you mentioned founders and interacting with founders. Other than just interacting with them, for a while to gauge their character, are there sort of signals or red flags that you get when you first meet a founder that say, okay, this is actually not somebody who has what it takes. This is somebody who's calling themselves founder because it's hip and cool these days to be calling yourself a founder, but actually they don't have what it takes to go through what is almost always a very arduous journey that has a lot of ups and downs. What are those red flags that you would look for when you first meet somebody?
Yeah, no, there's definitely like, I would say proxies or behaviors or characteristics that I personally sort of have taught myself to look for and be on the lookout, right? And I wouldn't say there's a constant set of these things, but there's definitely some reoccurring themes. So in no particular order, I would say, does the founder have passion about what they do? Are they committed to what they're doing? That's very important because entrepreneurship, maybe it's portrayed in the media or elsewhere as something glamorous. It's not. I've been there as a founder, and it's actually really tough. It's a lot of hard work, and to succeed is, a lot of hard work, being consistent, being persistent, being resilient. Again, all these characteristics being very important. It's very important to have that resilience, to have that persistence, to have that passion and dedication to succeed because it's extremely hard. And most founders, fail. So that's a big set of, I think, characteristics that's very important, which of course is manifested by different people differently. But at the end of the day, it's a very important common denominator. From there on, one thing that I like to look at, and it's a very telling thing, is how they take feedback, right? Now, that does not imply that I am better or I know better, but I have my own experiences and I like to humbly share them with founders and see, if that can be useful to them. But I think it's very important to see how people take feedback, right? So whether you're, the most important person in your industry or you're a first-year analyst anywhere, it doesn't matter your level. I think it's very important to be receptive to feedback. And being receptive to feedback, I think, is a fundamental characteristic of founders. And I see the ones that are not receptive to feedback typically may not do so well. And I think that's very important. So I think these are some of the characteristics. Again, I don't think being a founder in entrepreneurship is as, you know, as glamorous as it may seem. It's actually consistently executing on a day in, day out, being consistent, and along the way accepting help and taking on feedback and adjusting, right? I don't think we can hardwire ourselves or founders to know the answer to every question. It's about having that built-in, you know, judgment to adopt on the journey and see what you need to adjust to succeed. So I don't think there's a golden answer, but I think these are some of the characteristics, perhaps.
Talking of adjustment, you had mentioned earlier that, you know, when you first came to the region around 2006, it looked like it was a place of growth and promising. So you decided to stay here. A couple of years later, we have the global financial crisis, and this region, like everywhere else, got impacted. What were you thinking at the time? Were you thinking, what have I done? Oh, this has been a mistake. I shouldn't have done this. I should now be somewhere else that has a better chance of recovery. What was going through your mind at that moment?
I think, you know, that maybe assume that I have the wisdom to think of these things, right, at the time. I think when you're like in your early 30s, like you think you know everything, but you're, you know, I'm sure you're missing a lot of things and have a lot of blind spots. But no, I remember like it felt like, you know, it was like sort of like the end of the world kind of thing. But it was also like a bit of a global crisis, right? I'm not going to necessarily try to claim that I knew the answers or I had this confidence that everything would be okay, because you never know that. I remember, you know, Dubai emptied out. It felt like the end of the world. But I think one thing that's always been a guiding principle for me is like to have a long-term view, right? So I didn't move to Dubai or to the region because it was in style. Actually, I went against the current. I remember when I moved here, my classmates from my MBA would call me from New York and London and Hong Kong and be like, what are you doing? Like, why are you going there, right? And so my answer, you know, in my mind was like, I see a long-term perspective and a long-term future here. So I didn't know it was going to work out, but I had a hope that it would. And I think this sort of also kind of plugged into, again, not wanting to claim any sort of foresight, but I felt there was also intertwined sort of this geopolitics of the world moving eastwards, right? The center of power and sort of, you know, the international system sort of shifting more towards the east. I don't know if that was sort of something that I saw happening or more of a hope, but I felt, you know, but in the meantime, you know, what happened is like the world became more decentralized, more multipolar, and, you know, Dubai and the region has become a hub, right? It's become a hub of entrepreneurship in my space and of capital, but more broadly, I mean, you know, of course, there are challenges in certain parts of the region, and that's very sad and needs to be addressed. At the same time, you know, in the GCC, especially when it comes to the UAE and Saudi, they've become like, you know, these centers of stability and growth and innovation, right? And I think the countries of the region have become you know, to adopt and take on this innovation and drive forward, you know, growth. So anyway, to rewind to your question, did I know it was going to work out? Absolutely not. I was hoping it would.
There wasn't doubt or self-doubt in terms of the decisions you've taken.
I think there's always doubt, but there's also like a sort of inherent confidence that you're hoping that things would work out in the right way. And I think, you know, I was proven right, I think, but not because I had any sort of foresight. I think there's always luck, right? There's always luck.
And where do you see the whole investment ecosystem and the tech startup ecosystem has grown tremendously over the last 10 years? Where do you see it going? Do you think we will be able to continue the growth rate that we've had before? Any major challenges we need to address?
Yeah, so when I went into venture capital in around 2016, it was sort of like around the time of the birth of this ecosystem. So I feel very fortunate to have been there from kind of the beginning. So let's just say that in those last 8 or 10 years, we've come a long way, and there's been a lot of progress. We went from very little to now a vibrant ecosystem across the region, a venture capital community actively investing, success stories. Success stories are very important to inspire the imagination of future founders and, of course, investors. So I think we've come a long way. I think we started from a very low base, but the growth has been immense. And I think one of the key things that is very positive at the current juncture is that we are now basically at the first complete cycle of this ecosystem. The birth, the rapid growth, the bubble, the correction, and now I think we will, in my humble view, is that going forward we will be able to grow and invest and build in a much more sustainable way. Because in every downturn and every correction, there's lessons to be learned. And I think one of the lessons, at least in our small ecosystem or world of startups and venture capital, is that we need to build sustainable companies that are not growing at any cost, and companies that one day will be successful and be profitable and produce an exit and have an impact in the sectors and the economies and the societies they're operating in. So I'm very optimistic, not by default, but because I see that the fundamentals are there. We're off to a great start. And because now we've internalized the failures and the issues and the challenges that we faced in this journey, I feel like now we're much stronger to grow going forward with the ecosystem. So there's a lot of benefit to have lived this, as I said, this full cycle. And it's not necessarily everything will be smooth sailing, but there's a lot of great potential here, and it's driven by a lot of fundamental things which we all know, but it's always good to repeat. A large youth population, tech savvy, growing economies, very ambitious governments looking to innovate and leapfrog. Economies that are looking to digitize and innovate and even disrupt. So all these ingredients are there, and they're here for the long term. And I'm hoping that we have learned from our mistakes so that we continue to do this in a sort of rational and sustainable way going forward.
What's the one challenge or the one thing to watch out for that might not give us this growth?
I guess barring any sort of macro challenges, which these days I think is everyone's mind. I think in our space it's very easy to get carried away and to get carried away by fads or trends which seem very appealing. So I think it's just I wouldn't say there's any sort of like aha advice for that. It's more of like more boring stuff of like being consistent about how you look at the space and investing in things that will work and have the fundamentals to be successful, not to be carried away by short-lived trends and excitement, and always have that discipline to invest in the right way and take bets on the right founders. So again, not glamorous thoughts or advice, but much more about consistency, having a long-term view, and consistency, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's about building long-term impact and not just sort of having short-term in and out of any industry or startup or investment. So that's the idea.
I want to change tack a little bit to Christos, the personal side. You had told me that initially, when you were studying, your hopes was to become a diplomat, and that was something that you were interested in. And you also, with that, have a love of history and of reading about it. Clearly, you haven't become a diplomat. I have two questions on this. First, is there a regret anywhere in the choices that you've made along your career? Is there one thing that you say, I wish I had done that at the time, or I wish I had tried that path, or I wish I'd tried that job or that move? That's the first question. And then the second one, if there isn't, and we're happy where the journey has brought us today, how does the diplomat Christos still carry itself with you? Where does it manifest itself?
Sure.
How you see the world?
So it's an interesting question. I've never thought of my journey as having any regrets, to be honest. Okay. Now it doesn't mean it was perfect. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean it was linear. It doesn't mean that there were not failures or difficulties. But I've never said, you know what, I wish I did that or this. I felt fortunate for every step of the way Because even when there were difficulties, I learned things and I internalized them, and that made me stronger, etc. But to go back to your initial question, so no regrets. But to go back to your initial question, yeah, growing up, one of my favorite things even to this day is just as I said before, learning about other cultures. So I loved and love history, learning how things happened in the past, and that definitely influences the future in different ways. So growing up, my dream initially was to become a diplomat and to be that person who can reach across, different boundaries and borders and across different cultures, etc.
At what age? At what age did this happen?
I mean, middle school and then high school. And I actually applied and went to Georgetown School of Foreign Service, which is a school for diplomats, right? And I ended up not being a diplomat. And the reason for that is I actually looked into it and I was sort of not, impressed by what that would mean in terms of what I could achieve or, the journey that could happen and, for different reasons that I might not go into. But there was a sort of maybe a conscious, unconscious decision there that I said, I do want to become a diplomat in the broader sense of the word, right? But through business, right? And actually affect, impact, and change through business, right? And I don't know if I'm delusional or not, but I feel in a sort of broader way, I kind of achieved this, right? In a way, being in a part of the world which I'm not from, right? So I'm not an Arab, I'm Greek and I'm in the Middle East. But on a daily basis, whether it's founders, our investors, stakeholders, always reaching across these cultural boundaries and getting to know different people from different parts of the world. And I do think, and that's where I guess the diplomat kind of kicks in, is that I think, going back to relationships, it's very important to understand who people are, where they come from, what's important, show respect to who they are and what's important to them. And that goes a long way, So, and especially in this part of the world where relationships are very important, right? I've lived in other parts of the world where, being maybe transactional or transaction-oriented is the norm. And I'm here where relationships are important. And growing up, that was also very important to me. Relationships are I think, fundamental. So I think that's a key. And then there was different parts of that journey that got built in. So as a small example, but also maybe sort of worth mentioning, recently, we founded a Hellenic Business Council for, Greek people living in the UAE. Actually, when I first moved here, I think there were like about 300 Greeks. Now there's maybe 10,000. Okay, so there's a more vibrant community, never organized. Long story short, we organized, this community, and it's actually been very interesting because it's been an enabler for me personally and the community, and even for my job, to build this bridge between Europe and the Middle East and Greece and the UAE and Saudi. So yeah, again, I don't know if I'm delusional or not, but I do feel in a broader sense I have become a diplomat, but on the business side of things. And I really do enjoy doing business in this part of the world because it's relationship driven, and also because these relationships are valued and fundamental part of how business is done, in the region.
You're absolutely right on the importance of understanding a culture to be able to do business in it, especially in this part of the world. I think if you come from a very transactional, gung-ho type business environment and you try to behave like that here, that probably
doesn't work, no.
And you give me a great story about this before, which I'd like to share with whoever is listening or watching. Tell me about the cups of coffee and the deal making.
Yeah, I feel like, so I was telling you, right? So there's this article written by an INSEAD professor. The title is, How Many Cups of Coffee to Do Business in the Middle East, to do a deal in the Middle East. And in some ways, I feel like it was written for me, or for people who have shared a similar journey. So what the article says is that, the region is very relationship driven. It's very much a personal interaction. So getting to know people is important. Getting to a deal or, an agreement or doing business together is a process. And the process includes getting to know people and understanding them and not sort of jumping to an outcome or a transaction. It also stated that if you look at Europeans in the region, typically Southern Europeans, and it actually does mention Greeks typically fare better in that regard because there's a lot of similarities culturally, right? So, being brought up where I was brought up, we're taught, you focus on the human, on the relationship, you get to know people before you jump into any sort of deal or transaction. And I think that I mentioned before the cultural affinity is great. So it's not only doing well, but it's also enjoying what you do and how you do it, right? So I really enjoyed those interactions. But that article is great. I mean, I printed it out and I have it on my desk, and it's almost like part of my own personal journey here in the region. And it fundamentally captures why I really enjoy living here and why I really enjoy doing business here. And that cultural affinity that really, has been a very key part of my own, personal journey.
You said that 25 years ago, if I had told you you would be in venture capital, you'd have said, no way. If you look now forward 25 years, is it clear to you where you're going to be, or is it still the same kind of?
Yeah, who knows, right? I mean, I would love to think that I will be retired in Greece and traveling to the region a lot. But who knows, right? I have no idea what will happen, and there's a lot of factors to that. But that would be my sort of wish, let's say.
From everything I've heard from you, I think the whole bridge building and diplomatic aspect of you and the affinity with the culture will certainly be playing a part somewhere in this whole journey.
For sure, I hope so. I really enjoy that part, definitely.
Christos, thank you very much for sharing your journey.
It was an honor and a pleasure, and really thank you for having me here. It was real. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.